Welcome to the Catastrophic Comeback Podcast with American injury lawyer Clarke Speaks, helping you find hope, purpose, and joy after a catastrophic injury.
Welcome to Catastrophic Comeback. I am thrilled to have my guest today, Sherman Criner. Sherman Criner is a very well-known mediator in North Carolina and has been for a long time. Welcome, Sherman. Thank you for being here.
Clarke, thanks for having me today.
So Sherman, the focus of our podcast is on people with catastrophic injuries, and a lot of it is devoted to different areas of recovery. Our mission is to help people who've been in catastrophic injuries recover physically, financially, and emotionally. Sort of this part of the show is designed to focus on the financial part, and then a subset of that, which is legal. And so if people have lawsuits after catastrophic injuries, what we're trying to show is how the mediation fits in that process. So first, can you tell us what a mediation is?
Yeah, I was going to mention that right off the bat is, first of all, a lot of people don't know what mediation is. And the first question I ask somebody when I sit down is, have you ever been through a mediation? And a lot of times people say they have. And so then I'll say, well, can you tell me a little bit about that previous mediation you went through? Not so much to know about the facts of that case, but a lot of times they will tell me that, yeah, I went through one before where I sat down and the attorney asked me a bunch of questions, and they're getting confused that was a deposition, or they've been through some other segment of the legal process that they think was mediation but was not mediation. So mediation actually is where somebody like myself sits down with the parties to help them try to work out an agreement with whatever litigation is going on. The whole process started back, kind of grew out of the labor disputes we had at the turn of the century in the 1900s. Then it really started picking up in the federal court system when there was a big backlog in the 70s. And it really helped clear some of the federal case backlog. And so then the state cases were also having a tremendous amount of backlog. And so they were looking at ways to try to get these cases moving and just not sit for years and years and years. And so really one of the first states to implement it was Florida. And they started a pilot mediation program. And then North Carolina was a very early kind of adoptee of mediation as well. They sent a group, the Supreme Court appointed a group to go down and study the Florida model. They brought it back and implemented it here. And that really that process began organically, probably in the mid 80s, really kind of didn't get funded or established until the early 90s. And the big thing with our system is it's a party pay system, is that there was not an obligation put on the taxpayers or on the General Assembly to fund the mediation program. And so what they did is they started, I think, with 11 judicial districts, and they did a pilot program to study how effective it would be. And when I say the cases is, they took the civil cases, basically people think about like the car wreck cases, and they wanted to see how successful it was, kind of see what type of forms needed to be put together and things of that nature. And New Hanover County, which is our judicial district, was one of those pilot programs, and it worked very well. And so basically it has become permanent and has expanded to every county statewide implemented. And so all the civil cases that are filed in North Carolina are required to go through mediation. Each different segment of the mediation programs have different settlement rates. But I think overall, they're usually somewhere in about 70s. 70% of the cases tend to get settled. And a lot of times if the case does not get settled, it at least puts it in a position to get settled moving forward. So that's just kind of like a real quick synopsis of kind of how the process started and what mediation is. Again, the mediation, it gets ordered into mediation. Typically, both parties are represented. And when I say parties, someone like yourself is representing the injured person. And then typically there's insurance involved, and the insurance company will hire their own attorney. And so those attorneys will ask me to come in. The fees are split by both sides. That's what I meant when I said that it's a party payer system. There's not a financial obligation on the taxpayers or paid for through the General Assembly. And then we sit down and, you've been through hundreds of them. And it's an attempt for you to explain the case. The other side will explain their case, and then we discuss the case and try to work it out.
So to give a people an idea of where it fits into the process. So someone is in some kind of a catastrophic injury, accident, and they have a permanent injury, and they might, talk to a lawyer and find out, do I have a claim? And then while they're recovering physically, the lawyer is sort of putting the case together, getting the experts and doing the things that he or she needs to do to advance the ball. And at some point in catastrophic cases, in my experience, almost all catastrophic cases go into litigation. Is that your experience?
Yes.
And when I mean catastrophic cases, I mean cases where people have permanent injuries and they have large medical bills, and you're looking at million and multi-million dollar disputes. And so my experience is most if not all of those cases go into litigation. That doesn't necessarily mean they go to trial, but they go into litigation, meaning a complaint is filed in court. Now, so the mediation takes place between the complaint being filed and between the trial. Can you tell me procedurally where it falls in that process?
Well, it can even be held prior to a complaint being filed. And so when you use the term catastrophic, and I know what you mean, that it's a large amount of money involved, it can be the damages are very serious, they're life-altering. But I think one of the key words to keep in mind, too, is they're complex because there's so many moving parts. And so it takes time. And so both attorneys, both sides have to kind of properly evaluate the case. I'm sure that you've done, a lot of times you'll do pre-litigation depositions where you sit down and talk to whether they're medical care providers or witnesses or accident reconstructionists. Have to get expert reports done. Sometimes you have to get kind of life care plans put together. And this has to be done by both sides to properly evaluate the case. So a mediation.
Usually these are teams of lawyers on both sides in a complex catastrophic case like this. Is
Correct.
that fair?
And I think the word you used is team. And so you've got to get your experts together, your team, your expert witnesses, and everything. And it takes time. And also you want to find the proper window to mediate the case and settle it. If somebody is, say injured, you're not, and has a catastrophic injury, you're not mediating it 30 days later. The person's got to get through all their treatment as much as they can to find out what type of recovery are they going to have. So there's a time element to making sure these cases are mediated at a proper time, that, if there's a bunch of future medical surgeries or something that need to be done, a lot of times those need to kind of take place so the person heals, so they realize what type of residual capacities they have, so that can be evaluated. But again, they can be conducted at any time. And the one thing I will say about the catastrophic mediations I've done is a lot of times it takes more than just one mediation. In fact, and I think I probably had this discussion with you, is I usually will tell people with a catastrophic case, I usually find it takes 3 mediations. And the first mediation is typically done, and it's just kind of the parties kind of laying out the case to each side, is that, this is how we see it. The other side, says this is how we see it. There's a pretty big gap between those numbers, okay? And so it's just both sides kind of just that initial filling out process. And we don't get very close. But there's usually an agreement like, let's come back to the table 6 months down the road or whatever the case may be. And then at the second mediation, what I usually find is we get pretty close. And then it usually takes that third mediation to kind of get that, to close the deal. And it's just because they're complicated cases. A lot of times additional information has to be obtained. And so, I don't want people to think it's just a one and done type of situation,
Right.
Especially we're differentiating between a run of the mill type case and a catastrophic type case.
Well, so let's just look at a run-of-the-mill case for just a minute. A run-of-the-mill case might be there's an incident, a car wreck, for example. There's 3 or 6 months of medical treatment. There is We collect records, submit records and bills and those types of things in a demand. Maybe we resolve the case through pre-litigation negotiations. That happens a lot. If we don't, then we would file a complaint, written discovery, depositions, and then is that the point where mediation is generally in the garden variety injury case would take place?
Yes, once the complaint's filed, then the court will issue an order that the case has to be mediated. And talking about the run-of-the-mill case, the example I would use is basically like somebody's in a car, they get hit, and they break their arm. Okay, so the arm is casted. There's really no complications. Typically a broken bone will heal sometime in 6 to 8 weeks. Typically, it's a pretty good result. Again, this is assuming nothing unusual. And so at the end of the healing period, the doctor will typically release the patient, and the patient may be given some type of nominal rating, say a 5% rating. So you as the attorney, you can kind of sit down and quantify all this because they've completed their medical treatment, and all right, they had $10,000 worth of medical bills. They missed this amount of time from work. They've got this type of permanency. And you kind of quantify all those, and then you go to mediation, and it's pretty straightforward. You just try to find out what's the most money the insurance company is willing to pay. You discuss the pros and cons with your client of the risk and the time element of going forward into court. And then, like I said, typically somewhere 70 to 80% of the cases settle. The difference with a catastrophic case is that people tend to have ongoing medical needs, whether it's some type of attendant care, ongoing prescriptions, potential procedures. There may be some complications with insurance involved, meaning, if they don't have insurance, how are they going to pay for these future medical expenses? Sometimes Medicare or Medicaid get involved, and you've got to deal with set-asides. And that can be that's probably a subject of a podcast in itself.
For sure, yeah, liens and that sort of thing, yeah.
And you can get into, attendant care, life expectancy issues. And so it can become very complicated, and there's a lot more moving parts. And so those are much more difficult to handle.
A lot of times in these catastrophic cases, in my experience, there are several different insurance companies involved for the defendant or the defendants. And so a lot of times there's a lot of, it's not our fault, it's his fault. It's not his fault, it's their fault, and all that. And that can be difficult to weed through and affect an insurance, the likelihood that a matter resolves or settles.
Yeah, those can be complicated issues where you have multiple insurance companies, whether there's multiple parties and they each have their own insurance company, and you're trying to figure out who is on the risk is the term we kind of use. Also, there can be kind of vertical layers where there can be underlying insurance of a minimum amount of money, whether it's $30,000 or $100,000, whatever the case may be. And then you've kind of got to get to excess carriers, or sometimes you have to get into, uninsured motorist coverages. And so a lot of times you've kind of got to, it's kind of like an onion. You've got to peel back those layers to find out what is your available pool of insurance money. And, each of those insurance companies individually have to evaluate things. And so, again, that's why, the word we keep using is it's complicated.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.